Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Taryn.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good.
Welcome to...
She can't do that.
But she did it anyway.
She did. And this one really,
Oh, yeah. This one did.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot in this episode we should tell our guests in case some people are sensitive. This is another one that's going to be 2 parts. The first part does cover some themes that people might be sensitive to. Child abuse,
Mm-hmm.
organized crime.
It's an intense story. Kimbyrleigha is
Kimbyrleigha.
our guest today.
Yep. Should we just...
What a strong woman.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm excited for her to share her story.
Yeah. This is a great one.
Yeah.
Let's get into it.
Let's go.
Where did you grow up?
So I'm originally from South Florida. I grew up in Fort Lauderdale, and I was all over the place to begin with, Wilton Manors and mostly Fort Lauderdale area. But I did actually end up growing up with my grandmother. So even though I started out living with my mom and stepdad at the time, I eventually started living with my grandma when I was about 10. And it was definitely night and day because I went from living in, kind of a more toxic environment to living with, a husband and wife that had been together for decades, and
This
it
was your grandma and grandpa?
my maternal grandma and grandpa. So it was very different to see a healthy relationship. I had never really experienced that before. And they also lived in a really nice neighborhood. And I was coming from living on a boat. So now there was a yard to play in, other kids my age.
So you grew up on a boat?
I did.
What does that mean?
So my mom and stepdad had this dream at one point that never worked out, but they thought they would rent our house out that my grandfather built, another, project he had, and gave to my mom as a wedding present with my father. But this was now her new husband and they thought they were going to sail the world. And so they bought a 52-foot S2 sailboat, like with the sails, having to learn how to do all of that. And they thought they were going to sail. I don't know where they thought they were going to go, but we ended up just docking it and living on it for a couple years.
Which is still such an adventure.
It actually was a really interesting time of my life that I look back on now more fondly. But at the time, I have to say, as a, second, third, and fourth grader, because that's when I was there, it at one point kind of stifled my social development because I was living, I was going to school, but I was living in a place where it was very touristy. We would dock at hotels, like on the intercoastal waterways in Fort Lauderdale and Las Olas Boulevard. And we would see new people all the time. So you would never really get to make relationships because children would come play, at the hotel pool, which we got to enjoy being at the hotel, but then they would leave. So I never really felt like I had solid friendships during that time.
How much space was on that boat, though? Was it you, your mom, and then your mom's boyfriend?
It was my mom, my stepdad, me, my younger half-sister, and a dog.
Okay.
And just for reference, my younger sister and I slept in the V berth. And so it's like where the point of the ship is in the front. And so our legs would overlap at night. So it wasn't exactly the most cozy
So you
situation.
didn't really have like your own room or anything like that? It was just like a little corner where you could sleep?
You actually had to climb into it. So you had to get inside this little bunk, so to speak. And then it had shelves on the side where you can put books or like hold things. And then it was just a bed. So there wasn't really like a room or anything. And most of the time we would spend off the boat at the hotel, whether that was like in the, eating area outside or at the pool. And then it was like at the end of the night, we would get into the boat and just go to bed.
Did you have a feeling of otherness growing up because you were living on a boat and recognized that that was maybe different than the other kids at school?
No, I didn't feel that. I don't know why I didn't feel that. I mean, maybe I did and I don't remember it. But I've always kind of liked being different and never really bothered me. I think I was really striving to be unique ever since I was really little. And there could have been many reasons for that. It could have been a defense mechanism because of the things I went through, maybe kind of like putting on a mask and being someone else, maybe feel more comfortable from who I really was and what I was going through. But no, I kind of embraced being different, and I would deliberately kind of stir things up just to kind of be noticed.
A little rebellious. Okay.
Rebellious, mischievous, ornery, a lot of things I did on purpose because I think I craved a lot of attention I wasn't getting at home.
That makes sense.
Where was your father?
So my father went to prison when I was 2, and it was a very traumatic experience when he got arrested because he was on the run, and my mom knew. My mom was harboring him basically, and he had gotten involved in a lot of things, but mostly organized crime and drugs. And so, from a very, very tiny baby, my dad would kind of use me as a, how do you say it, distraction to do drug deals. He would even put like cocaine in my baby carriage, and he would tell me these stories later in life. So obviously I didn't know any of this was going on when I was a 6-month-old. But my mom even told me there were nights where she didn't know where I was because he would take me and he would be gone for hours and no cell phones in the 80s, had no idea where he was. And she was a nervous wreck for hours, wondering, if he's going to come back. And he one time took me all the way to Boston from Florida with his best friend who he did a lot of crimes with, who is still in prison, by the way. His best friend is still there. And finally, my dad, you name it, he did it. He burned down our house at one point so he could get some insurance money. And I was in the house with my mom. And so luckily we didn't get burned or anything. But I've been terrified of fire for like a really long time. I started a fire the other day too. Randomly in our condo, I started a fire. Yeah, I've always been, I think it's just a something from my past. Like it really scares me at how fast it can spread.
Oh my God. I understand that so well because I was in a burning house once too. And when I'm somewhere and I smell a little bit of fire, somebody maybe just lit a candle somewhere, I get so overly nervous, like, oh my God, that smells like fire. Like, what's happening? Like, where am I? Where's the exit? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real thing.
Number on you for.
Wow.
And that actually does showcase something that I think about. We talk about it kind of freely when we say like PTSD or trauma, but we do have trauma responses from little things that we might not fully remember like the entire details of, because I do that too, where I like smell things and I'll be like, wait, what is that? But I also I'm very, I guess, skeptical, or like I'll hear something and think right away it's going to be something bad. But my dad, did that for insurance money. And luckily we weren't burned or anything, but we definitely had a lot of like smoke inhalation. When I came out, my neighbor told me this later when I was like 10. She was like, you were covered in soot from head to toe. Your clothes were covered. And the only place that was white was underneath my nose where I was breathing. So there was like 2 strips of white skin underneath my mom and I's nose. And that's it.
Nostrils.
Oh my God. That's a freaking risk he took.
I think I was about 1 at the time when he was doing that. I was just a really little infant. And finally, we got raided in the middle of the night. And, guns, everything, they were there for my dad. And he was taken away. He went to prison. He was there. He was supposed to be there, I believe, 10 years. But he ended up being there until I was about 10 years old. So about 8, I would say, like 6 to 8 total. And that was a really hard time for my mom and I. She instantly became a single mother. She was young. She was only 19 when she had me. So I think she was about 22, maybe like around that age range. And I think back on that and I'm like, I didn't even know what I was doing at 22.
Right.
Oh, no.
Like how in the world was she able to deal with a husband that is a alcoholic, drug addict, but also drug dealer, in a lot of crime? And her story is incredible as well. Like she's overcome so many things, and it's just, I don't know, I guess it's, who you pick, but my dad definitely evolved into more of a monster, even though he changed so much for the better in prison. And he's actually very lucky that he did go to prison. I think his life would have been a lot different. And it really helped us to have a relationship afterward because he was there and really wanted a relationship with me when he got out.
Were your parents in a good place when he went to prison? I mean, how good of a place you can be with a criminal, alcoholic, drug addict, but were they like really a couple, and did they try to keep it that way when he was in prison?
My mom and dad are soulmates, and they still are till this day. It's just, life took them in different situations and routes in life. So they're, went their separate ways. But my mom, she was strikingly beautiful. I mean, back then when there wasn't as much to do to stay youthful and whatnot, I mean, she would walk into a room and she just had like this porcelain skin, jet black hair, brown, like deep brown eyes, just gorgeous. And everywhere she went, men would stop and, she was a model at one point. She was doing a lot of like acting but her passion was hairstyling. She loved to make other people beautiful. So my mom and dad ended up actually meeting at a restaurant. It was called The Caves. And if you look it up online, it was a famous restaurant in Fort Lauderdale. It was right on Federal Highway and it looked like a cave. You went in and there were like stalagmites and stalactites and you would sit inside your own little cave.
How cool.
It was absolutely amazing. And my mom actually designed the uniforms that the women would wear because they would dress as cave girls. So she loved being creative. She was always very creative. And my dad, at that point in life, he was kind of working as a waiter, as a front, sort of just to have like a job. And he really wasn't doing that because on the side, he was opening up strip clubs, nightclubs, and then funneling money and drugs through those in Fort Lauderdale. But he had his eye on my mom for a while, but his best friend was dating my mom. So there was like the bro code and you didn't get involved. But my dad was a little bit older than my mom. I think he was about 7 years older. And I think my mom definitely craved the stability, the older person, someone to kind of guide her because she was a wild child. My dad wasn't the one for that. Even though he might have been more, mature and older, they were both very wild. So I think that that's why they connected so much because when my mom's boyfriend went away on a trip, he told my dad to watch over her. And, my dad was pretty powerful. He was scary. And so I think, from that, and he never tried to hit on my mom and everything. And she told me she was really mad about that because she was like, I wanted him to like, think I was cute.
Yeah.
And she's like, but he never did. He was just very, if you want to call it professional, but just loyal to his friend. But eventually they did, over the years, they eventually connected when my mom was about like 18, because at the time she was like 17, 18 when she was working there. And yeah, they were literally like the perfect match. I mean, my dad was the opposite looks wise. He had, the light blonde hair, these striking blue eyes, tan skin, like he's olive skin tone. My mom was white, so you can kind of like see the difference. And they just looked like, I don't know, like a Hollywood couple almost, But no, they were always the best for one another, but in the worst ways because they both started drinking, getting into drugs, and, with it readily available, my mom took part, I think, mostly just to be with my dad because she wanted to be close to him and knew that that's what he was indulging in. But my mom would stick by him no matter what. And that was, I think, one of her flaws going forward. And I really don't know where it stemmed from, but it's not something that I inherited, so to speak, because I won't let someone treat me poorly, but I think she put up with way too much. And there were nights my dad would come home from bar fights and his arms would be out of the sockets, like his shoulders. And my mom would put them back in for him. He had all of his teeth knocked out. He had no teeth. I mean, he was walking around with like 2 teeth left. And my mom was still there, seeing the good in him. Because moral of the story of, bad people, there's still good in some bad people. I can't say everyone because I haven't met them. But I think my mom saw what I see in my dad And there were a lot of good qualities. So she did stick by him, even when he was in prison. But eventually, she had to get a divorce.
Did she take you to prison? Did you visit your dad ever?
I never did.
No?
I always heard about him. He would send me things in the mail. His parents, my paternal grandma and grandpa, they were still in my life, and I would go see them every other weekend. So they sort of inherited like the custody that my dad would have had through the divorce, where my grandmother got to see me on the weekends. And she really taught me more about like my dad's history, where he was from. He was 100% like a mama's boy. His mother thought he could do no wrong. And that's probably why he ended up one reason he ended up the way he did, because I don't think he was ever really disciplined, or maybe they couldn't discipline him.
So there was not a world of consequences for him.
I don't think so, because I know, my grandma has since passed away, but when I was growing up and really got to know her, I could see it for myself. Even as a child, it was just like the babying. He was the most amazing thing. And she only had one child. So, she was from Lithuania. She came here for more opportunities. And she was actually a champion roller skater, like roller dancer. And that's how she met her husband, my grandpa, because he was in military intelligence and would travel around the world. And right when he saw her, he was like, okay, I've got my eyes set.
Yeah.
Nowadays, we would probably call it harassment or stalking.
Oh my God.
But he would not take no for an answer until she went on dates with him, and he grew on her.
And where did they meet?
I don't know where they actually met. I don't remember. I'm sure I've heard the story before, but I do remember. I believe he was at a show. He went with, groups of friends that were in the area at the time, wherever she was at that point, because she was traveling doing these skating events. And he was probably front row, probably somewhere up front. He was pretty high up in the military, so he did have a lot of privileges to do really interesting things. So yeah, I remember her saying like he saw her, and as soon as she came off stage, he was, or whatever you call that,
Right.
the roller ring.
Roller ring.
He was like, hello, who are you?
Yeah.
And he just would come to her shows from then on and have flowers every time. And, when I look back on photos, he was just a perfect little boy. Like what you would imagine if you thought about like the perfect little, beautiful little bouncing baby boy. And I think it's the start of it. Just thinking, oh my goodness, I have this perfect little boy. And they were a little older, having children at the time. And I don't know why they never had more. Maybe my grandfather traveling so much and being in other countries in a way. My grandma was by herself a lot with my dad, which might have been a reason he wasn't disciplined.
Right.
But it started from a young age that he got in a lot of trouble.
So it was an exposure that led him to commit crimes.
I would say, well, they were living in Boston at the time, and that was where they settled. He was born in Germany, and that was just because my grandpa was in the military, and that's where they were. But then they ended up getting a house, and he was raised, I would say, in Boston. But while his dad was away, he actually was with the neighborhood kids, which sounds completely, normal. Your kids are playing with other kids, but it was the whole, like, when the street lights come on, you have to come home, and nobody would know where he was. And at 7 years old, I believe, he started getting involved in the brotherhood in that area, which is gang related. And it started with little things like they would tell him, for a piece of gum, if you can go watch this area of the neighborhood and kind of tell us who you see, and for a child, it doesn't really seem like a big deal. But over the years and over the, times he was helping them out, the tasks would get more involved in crime to the point where it started involving money. And when money really drives you to get what you want, and even the power, knowing that you're in a group of people who, if something goes wrong, you can just say, oh, my brother, not my real brother, but my gang brother is going to come kick your butt. I think my dad, that's something that would appeal to him, knowing his personality. So it started small, and then it just kind of elevated to stealing. And he got really, really good at it, knowing exactly what to do, how to be really stealth.
And it's so frightening to think about how much influence other people have on children at a certain age. It's frightening for parents. It's frightening for me, for you, Taryn, probably too, for you, Kim, too. We're all parents here. We all have children. And you think like at some point, the influence that you have as parents or as a mother is so limited, and they get so much more influenced by the people they surround themselves with, and you almost can't do anything about it. You can try to set a good foundation, but when they then get in these circles, I don't know. I mean, I have no idea how I would deal with that, because I've not been there, and I hope I never get there that I have to deal with that. But that was probably a thing in his situation too. I mean, you said he never got really disciplined at home and things like that. But then, yeah, he found his people in this gang thing.
Absolutely. And I think my grandmother had always been kind of mischievous herself. When I asked her about my dad, because it was very limited information when I was younger, I knew he was in prison, but they would say, oh, he did some bad things and, he got... But my grandma would also make excuses for him. But going back to what she told me about herself, she told me a story where she was jealous of a little girl's hat. And, this is an older woman, so we're going back to like maybe now would be a cell phone. But she said that she was in music class and she kept looking at that little girl's hat. And finally, the little girl took it off and put it down on the bench, like next to a piano. And my grandmother grabbed it. And for no apparent reason that she can really understand, which really intrigued me, wanting to understand people, she shoved it into the toilet in the bathroom. And then she tried to flush it and realized, I mean, she probably was only 12 years old or something, who knows, or 10, that's not going to happen. And she rushed out of the bathroom, and then everyone was looking for this little girl's hat. And funny enough, she's like, maybe you should check the bathroom.
Oh no, she told her?
And
everybody's like, why would you check the bathroom?
So I thought to myself, like, wow, I think it's ingrained in us. Is it nurture or is it nature? And I've always thought it's a little of both. But it just goes to show there definitely was some kind of maybe a little bit evil, or I don't know if that's, I think you can say evil, like mischievous and evil side. To maybe even my grandmother that could have been passed on to my dad in some way, because I feel like his father was so just like militant, obviously being in the military, but just straight and narrow, nothing bad, always doing the right thing. So you have to kind of think, well, if that was his example, why did he stray into this other territory? But then they always say like people have addictive personalities or they're just drawn to certain things. But I think it might have been more towards boredom in the beginning, just being a little boy that was new to the area at first and kind of growing up. And like you said, the influences of people in the community and friendships, they really do supersede parents a lot of times, because you start thinking, well, I want to belong and I want my friends to think I'm cool and I don't want to be ousted from the group. And that's exactly what happened to my dad. And then it just escalated. But I know that my grandma would laugh at things that my dad did, and they thought it was absolutely hilarious. And there's also a cultural thing. Like my grandmother, it's like she's Old English, even from the Boston area, and the way that my grandpa was, but even being Lithuanian and the way that she would, I don't know, like accept certain things that maybe we wouldn't in our culture, because she thought it was absolutely hilarious that my dad, hurt these young children around his same age. They were bullies in the neighborhood, but so was my dad. And they were kind of like rival bullies. My grandma told me the story, and my dad told me later about how she got called from the police. Then my dad, I think he was only like 10 or 11 at the time, started a fire inside of a briar patch that the kids had kind of chopped like a little path through. And they would hang out there with their girlfriends, and they would probably bring like beers, and they maybe older kids. And my dad was just sick of, I don't know what he was sick of, but he decided, I'm going to get them back. And he put gasoline to the entrance of their cove, if you will, and set it on fire. So they had to actually go through the briars to get out of it. And these were women, like little girls and boys who had scratches all over them, their arms, their faces. I mean, it was like really extreme. I mean, that is not a prank. That is hurting somebody. And my grandma, I can remember her laugh till this day. It's just like this like hysterical laugh. And she would tell this story like it was, I don't know, like a joke.
Oh my God.
Interesting.
But that's something where when you just said you feel like we have it all a little bit in us. And I think some more, other less, but then it depends on what the reaction is to the things we do. Like, what do you get from the little thing? Like, we all try, and little kids try, and even toddlers, they try with everybody and everything. They try, how far can I go with my mom? How far can I go with my dad, with my grandma, whatever? How mean can I be? Like, is this a good way? They're just trying to start a life and to start living and figuring it out. But then it's so important what the reaction is to that. Like, if they hit somebody and they get a laugh, and they get like applause from the people, then, oh, that's a good way to go. Like,
Right.
let me just hit people because I'm getting the reaction that I want. You know, when your dad did like really, really mean things, but then got like a great reaction from his mother.
Right.
I mean, of course, he was like, okay, well, that's good. That's the way to go. And then when he got into these circles with his friends also, it's just like, I'm doing these mean things. And then there are these 6 boys that I look up to, and they're all proud of me. And we all just want love, right? From
And
everybody we
acceptance.
can get it, and acceptance.
Right. Exactly. That's what I was thinking.
So maybe we're all a little bit mean, but the reaction to it was different. So we learned maybe from parents and friends, like, that's not the way to do it. Like,
right.
choose a
'Cause
different way.
as creatures, like our animal instinct, let's just say, from who we are as humans, we want to survive, like at the core.
Mhm.
And I think we'll do anything to put ourselves in a good position. But over time, you realize, am I going to be a part of a community? Is this going to be good for everybody? Or is this just going to be good for myself? And we all know people that it's always going to be just good for themselves.
Oh, yeah.
But you're right. I never thought of it that way. And that's a really interesting perspective that I'm thinking of now is the way that my grandmother reacted. She was more like, oh, they got what they deserved. Now, I don't know the story. They could have been terrible bullies, but I really don't think something that harms someone with fire, with, bodily harm makes any sense in that situation as children. Like, it's just,
Right.
and it really just shows that my dad at a young age, he was willing to harm other people, and that goes further, and that extended into adulthood and beyond. And so I never, as you were asking me, like, no, I never went to see my dad. I didn't know much about him. I just knew he would send me things every once in a while, because one thing I wanted to say is his parents, they would send him a lot of money in prison. So he was not one of the ones that never got a taste of ice cream for 8 years. No, he was the one that had commissary all the time, everything in there for him, anything he really wanted. And, that also helped him because he was able to barter with other inmates. And it's really important because there's a hierarchy there. That's a whole other world.
Right.
One that I actually think is pretty fascinating. Not that I'm saying that I want to condone or even glamorize anyone going to prison, but there is a fascinating world to that, that it's its own society with its own rules. And you have to survive there as well, even more so because you can be killed.
Yeah.
Oh, even more so because you also can't leave.
Exactly. And
Like, if you're like, oh, I don't like the surrounding here, and these people are not good for me, I just choose different people. Oh, no.
There's
I
no way
can't. I
out.
have to make this
Yeah.
work with these. Yeah.
Yeah. And also the acceptance, like you have to learn to be very accepting of your situation and rise above like any of those struggles, which is why I say in a lot of ways, I think prison was really good for my dad. He's not a religious person, but he did tell me that in prison, they did read the Bible. They did learn right and wrong. And he started to have exposure to religion there. And that was one of the things he does think helped him in that time. And so even though he's not, a religious person by nature or like, ever studied that, when he was there, he did. And he was learning a lot about right and wrong and being maybe a better person. But also you don't want to find yourself in that situation again.
Yeah, this is not something we want to tell anybody to do, to find yourself, just go to prison. But so you were about 2 when you went to prison. And then at some point, your parents get a divorce and the stepdads come into your life. How was that?
Yeah. So my mom, she was always, I want to say boy crazy, but it's not really boy crazy. But if you imagine a person that's very influenced by getting love from men, like wanting attention. And there's a lot of people like that. And we can't really say that we don't.
Oh, and she was a beautiful early 20-year-old. I mean,
yeah,
of course she was boy crazy.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I
Weren't
don't
we all at that age?
Yeah.
I can all relate.
Yeah.
And she definitely went for the men that were hot. I mean, she was not going to be settling for somebody that didn't have a striking appearance. And so from my dad being in prison, my mom ended up going out a lot. My grandmother started watching me a lot more.
That would have been my next question. How did she go out with a child?
Right.
Like
Right.
the practical mother and me, it's just like, wait, what?
Exactly. I mean,
So
my
your grandma
grandmother
helped.
felt bad for my mom a lot in the beginning. That changed over time. But in the beginning, my grandmother did feel bad for my mom. And she was in a tight spot. And so my grandmother did step in here and there and would watch me. And then also remember, I did still go to my paternal grandmother's house on the weekends. So my mom definitely had some free time to do what she wanted. And she ended up meeting a guy in a band. He was the one with the long hair. It was blonde. And
What instrument?
I think he had like the rock star hair where it was kind of like puffy in the front, like short in the front and like long in the back. And he would wear like the no shirt, right? And the leather pants. And that was like his outfit.
Yeah.
I have
Total
to say,
piano bad boy.
very stylish, very bad boy-esque, but he wasn't really a bad boy. He was kind of more like I would say like boring person, but for the fact that he was in a band. So he didn't really have like an exciting life outside of I'm in a band.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom just gravitated towards him immediately. And then she got pregnant. So I was about 4.5 when my sister was born. And they ended up getting married when my mom was pregnant. And that was the start of a lot of turmoil for me. And I think what really truly shaped me in a lot of ways of where I went in life and who I am today. And I know that as parents, you were saying we care about like what our children are doing, but I also think about what our children are thinking, because even if people think like, oh, my child will never remember this, I can tell you with 100% confidence that I remember my childhood as a 4, 5, 6, whatever. I remember because my experiences were probably so traumatic that I do remember them. But yeah, maybe we put them in the back of our minds. And because I have done therapy, some of those have come out.
Mm-hmm.
But I have vivid memories of the abuse I went through and things that happened and things that were said to me, which developed into, I would say, like my love languages nowadays, because I think that's where we want to find love, like things that have happened to us and then feeling depleted and then craving a certain type of love.
Mm-hmm.
I really do think that comes from childhood and like where it was lacking. And the realistic part of it is we can't be perfect with our children. There's no way.
No.
They're going to lack something. And hopefully their future partner or their friendships, they will find something to fill that in a healthy way. And then we'll provide the parental love that we can. But for me, I felt very alone a lot of times. And I felt unloved. And I would constantly say in my head, nobody loves me. And that was what would come out when I would cry when I was younger. I would repeat that over and over again. Nobody loves me. Nobody loves me, And that was the belief that I had, whether that was a real belief or not. That was my thought from the way that I felt I was being treated back then.
And that's enough. If that's what you felt and that's what you felt, then that's reality for you.
Right.
It's not that somebody said like, oh, well, that wasn't true. It doesn't matter. That's
Exactly.
Right. That's what you felt.
What
that
you
was
felt.
your experience of the world.
It was. And I felt that as soon as my mom, this is the way I felt, as soon as my mom met him, I was kind of pushed to the side because I wasn't his child.
Mm-hmm.
And, my dad was a loser, what I was made to believe. Especially my stepdad started to really badmouth my dad. And at that point, I was old enough to recognize that somebody was talking about my father, even if I never really met him or thought I didn't meet him because I was so young. I would remember those things. And it did hurt me, even though I was like, well, he probably is a loser. He probably is a bad person. But in reality, my stepdad was a bad person. He was a monster. He was the first monster that I ever knew. And as a child, your father or your stepfather or that man role model in your life is going to be the first representation of a man.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to say I wasn't very interested in dating or getting to know men later on in life very much. I was much more focused on myself. And, that did hurt a lot of my relationships because I really didn't know how to love anyone because my examples were terrible.
Mm-hmm.
So you definitely got treated differently than your stepsister?
My mom started to treat me kind of like I'm on the back burner, like she has more important things doing. Like she can't really get to me right now, but she will. Just, hold on and you'll be next. But that's also because, she did have a new baby. And once the baby came along, I did not like the baby. I wanted nothing to do with the baby. I just felt like I wasn't treated very well. So why does the baby get all this attention? But my biggest problem back then with my stepfather and the whole situation was that he was physically abusive. There's one thing about saying bad things to someone, which I really don't like yelling. I don't, and it doesn't mean I haven't done it. Just because I don't like it doesn't mean that those things hadn't rubbed off on me, because we can get to that, because I have had to learn a lot of things from this and overcome it. But he started very verbally abusing the whole family, even the pets. And I loved animals. I love everything from a little ant to, a fly to a frog. I've always really loved creatures. And my mom taught me that. My mom was a lover of nature. She was kind of like a hippie growing up and wanted everything to be loved. But that was also, I think, her downfall. Is like she wanted to be loved so bad that she would make all these compromises. But yeah, he started verbally. And then eventually he just started, and I was the only one at first that he would hit. And then it started trickling into hitting my mom, but never my sister. So I did feel like I was treated differently because my mom was never there, and this is my perspective, never there to protect me. She would just let this happen.
Did she see it? Did she really like... Okay.
She did see it, because I have a vivid memory of one specific incident that I even wrote about later in school. I was a creative writer. I loved writing, which is, probably what led me to where I am now. And this isn't a bragging point. This is just real. When I was in college, we were asked to write about a situation that you've really never told anyone. And people were crying, and it was anonymous. So nobody knew that was my past, because you would never know that, considering who I presented myself to be as a college student. And I never said who it was that wrote it, obviously, because it's the whole assignment as you write this anonymously. And that really taught me that you never know what someone's going through, and you have to just take people as who they are, love them, even if they don't agree with the same beliefs, or you can see something in everyone you can relate to. Yeah. So obviously we don't want to continue loving people to do us wrong like my mom continued doing. But I think we can see something we relate to in everybody. And we'll get to some of the things I think about now when I'm doing what I do now, where when I'm picking and choosing cases and things, I do see bad and good, or things that I do believe in and don't. But going back to my childhood, I was treated differently by my mom. She did see it happening, and she wasn't there to protect me. And that really made me feel unloved.
Oh, yeah.
And the particular instance that I wrote about was when I was, I would say probably 5. Maybe could have been 4, but I was tiny. And I'm a tiny person to begin with. But there was a rope swing across the street from our house. We lived on a cul-de-sac, and there was just no house there, big trees, and somebody installed a swing on ropes. So it was like a wooden panel, and then the ropes were hanging from so far up. I don't even know how they got it up there. Could have been 100 feet. I don't know. I was a little girl. Might have been 20 feet.
It was probably 5 feet. But
right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Everything feels so big.
And it really wasn't. It almost was for an adult. It might have been created for someone who wanted to, in those days, smoke a cigarette and have a little swing.
Right.
I really do think it was for an adult. And I was so tiny that I had a lot it was a lot of work to get on the swing. Like it came up to my upper back area. I just remember having to pull myself onto the swing. And once I got on, I couldn't reach the ground. So I wasn't really swinging. I was more or less just kind of like rocking back and forth and sitting on it. And it was kind of my own little escape because there was a lot of yelling going on in my house. And I kind of just wanted that moment to myself, even as a 5-year-old. I would, to get away from the house and have something to do as a child, I would pick up cigarette butts from the sidewalk and collect them. Like, what was I doing?
And
I don't
what?
know.
Do what with them?
I would just collect them in like
them?
a little jar. And I would like count them and try to get out of my head, the stuff that was going on at my house. But that particular evening, I was on the swing and I saw my stepdad coming out and it was time for dinner, which, okay, rightfully so. It's time to settle down. It's getting evening time. It's getting a little dark out. And I truly was trying to get off of the swing. But, being a little child, I really couldn't get my footing and I didn't want to fall. And I was sort of like shimmying down it. And the wood was kind of on my back and my hands were kind of coming down the rope. So I didn't want to burn my hands. And he just was telling me I was taking too long in a very mean way, cursing, being very loud. What the F are you doing? You're effing slow. What's wrong with you? You're the R word, like, the word that we don't use. Like just those things. I was being told all these terrible things.
All those condescending things.
Very. And I gave up. I kind of froze. I still wanted to get down, but I was just frozen in fear. And plus, he was doing it in a more public place. And we'd always kind of only done that in the house. And my neighbors were the perfect family. They were the perfect family. And I didn't want them to know how bad my family was, even as I'm only like 5, I'm only
You were
like
aware of shame.
Yeah, I felt that. And so he comes marching with like no shirt on and his shorts on, his hair's all wild. He's just like running across the street and I just know what I'm in for. And he's walking across the path was to the swing was just, I don't know, like old grass, like dead grass and things. And he's barefoot and he's getting thorns and prickers and all kinds of things in his feet, which is not my fault. But
it's just escalating him though.
Yes, exactly. It was my fault in his perspective. It was like this stupid child, I was called everything you can possibly imagine, but he was so big. He was 6'7".
Oh my God.
So this was a monster.
Yeah.
And he just
presence
picked me up over his shoulder. And I knew that once I got in the door to my house, it was going to be hell. I just knew those 50 feet or however long, I was just wondering, like, what is he going to do to me this time? What am I going to have to endure? And I just remember, well, of course, the spanking and the hitting across the face and whatever else he did to me. But he stripped me down, like completely naked. And he turned on the scalding hot water in the bathroom. And you could see the steam coming up. And my mom's standing right there. And I was looking at her. And I was like, help me. I was yelling everything you can imagine a 5-year-old would be yelling. And he said, he would say this, you want to cry, I'll give you something to cry about. That's what he would say. And he put the scalding hot water on and then he just threw me in the bathtub. And then I was screaming. I mean, I just remember like my mouth being like shaking, of just like feeling so helpless and looking over at my mom. And she's just like kneeling on the ground. She might've been crying, to give her some credit. Like she might've been crying. She might've been really frustrated, not knowing what to do. And then as soon as I started crying like that, I would do that thing where you're like you couldn't breathe. And then he was like, oh, is it too hot for you? And so my mom does admit that she remembers this because she has pushed a lot of things out of her memory. But even recently, I got more confirmation that, she used to gaslight me so much. And I would want confirmation that I wasn't crazy and that these things really happened to me. And it was just about 2 weeks ago that she finally, like, again, reconfirmed this really happened. And she remembers it vividly. And I even screenshot the text message because I'm like, I'm going to keep that for the rest of my life because if I'm ever feeling like this didn't happen, I know it did. He went to the kitchen and I could hear him. Our house wasn't that big. He opened the freezer and I could just hear the tray, like the automatic ice tray where all the little half moon shaped, ice cubes are. and he just took the whole tub of ice and he poured it over my head. And all of those little ice cubes felt like knives. I mean, they could have been in my world. It was probably as sharp as a knife, being so hot in that water,
Right.
and then having such of like a cold pricking of my skin, so to speak. And that's the story I wrote. But I wrote it very poetically, in class, to where I knew it was going to be emotionally moving, because it should be. I mean, we should be devastated that a child goes through that.
Yeah. The thought of this is horrible.
Yeah. And so I also learned something in that moment. I learned, and I carried this throughout my teen years. I could immediately stop crying. And I could sort of like, I don't know how to explain it, but I could cry in my head, but I wouldn't show it. So like this really helped me later in life, because I could hide my emotions a lot. And I could also like turn on and off emotions, which could even be good or bad or manipulative or not. But we learn these defense mechanisms for a reason, and we're not perfect. So a lot of times we will use these things later in life to our advantage in some ways. But in the long run, it was to protect myself, because I never wanted people to know how I felt, ever.
But isn't that crazy that you think it's an advantage to hide your emotions?
Yeah. But I knew that if I cried, I would get a worse punishment.
Yeah.
So I would learn to be very stoic, like very, straight-faced. Nothing's going to faze me. I'm not sad, but I am,
Of course.
Yeah.
And you have to learn to compartmentalize what's really happening in front of you, the reality of what's happening, from your escape inside, that place you go to where you still feel safe, because obviously what was happening to you was not safe.
Yeah. And I just wondered why my mom, wouldn't help me. And in the moment, I was too little to like question my mom. But then later in life, I had multiple opportunities, because I did go to therapy and there were a lot of lessons to be learned. And I would try to confront my mom, but I feel like she felt so ashamed, and she was young. I'm not making excuses, because trust me, I've gone through a lot with my mom at this point, and I love her and I forgive her. But as a mother myself now, I can't excuse it, because I just think there's so many things she could have done. She had a really strong support system, and there are women who don't. And I've been in situations where I haven't had a good support system. And so I do blame her. And I do think that she picked this man. She brought him into my life. She let him abuse me. She didn't protect me. And therefore, I have a lot of pain from that.
Mm-hmm.
Of course. When I see that situation, that's the most hurtful thing, is like seeing this little girl and the mother is not helping. It's not even what the strange man is doing, but the mom is witnessing it and it's not helping. That's like, I mean, I don't know what that does to a child.
So the domestic situations that were going on just got worse and worse all the time, and my mom would stay. And that also really confused me as a child, because again, I'm having this example of what a relationship is like. And I'm thinking, why would you want to be around somebody like that? Because I couldn't stand being around him. I would escape to my neighbor's house all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they were a Christian family that lived next door to me, the Parkers. And I just remember they owned a lumber company in Fort Lauderdale called Lauderdale Lumber. So I think it was called, if you know, you know out there. You know who you are, Rebecca. She became my best friend. She was a lot older than me. I want to say like 12 years older than one of their children.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked up to her so much, because her family is what I always dreamed of having.
Mm-hmm.
You would come into their front door and you would smell cinnamon. Her mother was baking, and she was doing jazzercise in the living room, and they had a pool out back and cats. And like, I don't want to cry, but like,
You can. We have napkins here.
Yeah.
That was your safe place. That was your escape, where you could go and see a little light and not feel the heavy darkness around you.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I would go over there a lot, and I wasn't really close to her mom at all, but I just would remember hearing her voice from upstairs when I would come in. She was just so pleasant, and I didn't really have anyone like that.
How did your grandparents get involved? Because you said you moved to your grandma when you were 10?
Yeah, so one thing I really tried to do, but I wasn't brave enough, and that's why I understand, like, I do forgive my mom. No, it takes a lot of bravery for a woman to get out of a domestic situation. And I've read so much about it now. And I think it takes 7 times to try to leave, domestic violence.
Is that the number?
I think it is.
Wow.
I would have to look again, but I think it is. And now I know that my mom probably did try to leave so many times, and she was probably really scared of him. And I have to give her some credit because she was also being abused.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know how to tell anyone. So for a very long time, I would try to rehearse, like, how do I say it? Kind of how we were talking in the beginning of this before we came on about being an adult and not knowing even how to make a friend. Like, you almost don't know how to approach a certain situations. Nobody teaches you. There's no manual. But when I do my videos these days, and we'll get into like what I do and who I am and where it's led me, I do want to give a message that I hope by doing the things I do now and telling the stories that I tell, that we will learn how to come forward and we'll learn where we can get help. But I just know that my mom, I witnessed so many terrible things with what he was doing to my mom. We would go on these family vacations, and I'm like, air quotes, like family vacations. They were like the vacations from hell. And even though all of my photographs in albums look like I'm having a great time and it's loving, you would have no idea what was going on behind the scenes. It's just terrible. There was a time in Las Vegas, I remember my mom, we were going to a circus, and we were in the parking lot. It was always a fight. I don't know what it was about. It could have been anything.
Right.
They would get in these extremely violent, hitting each other, yelling, screaming in a closed car, like this small environment where you can't get away. And maybe that was my stepdad's doing because he knew, oh, she's in the minivan, like she can't escape me. But I remember him slamming my mom's fingers in the sliding door of the van.
Oh.
And her nails just like flew off. She had like long acrylic nails because she did hair nails. She always had like the long nails, and she was like really pretty and in fashion, but they were just bleeding and cracked. And it was just so violent. And the thing that also traumatized me is watching the situation was how they would laugh afterward.
Both of them?
Both of them.
Oh.
So she would get her hand slammed in the door. And then I remember there was a big jug of water in the back seat. And she took the water and she started spraying it on my stepdad. And they started laughing, like hysterically.
Oh my God.
And then it was like, she looked back and she's like, we cooled down, we cooled off now. And I was just like, what in the world is this?
Yeah.
Like, why are you laughing with this monster? And, my little sister at the time, she was younger than me. So here I am, 7 years old. She's like 3 or 4. She was like 3 probably. Doesn't really understand what's going on. And then her dad wasn't abusing her, wasn't hitting her, wasn't treating her the same way. But at least she is my witness to so many things that we went through. And she knows her father was like that. And she even calls him a monster herself. And she's also very ashamed that I was treated the way I was. But I ended up at my grandparents' because I knew I had to tell somebody. I knew. And my stepdad would isolate my mom. That's one of the, key things that an abuser will do. He will keep you away from your support system as much as possible. So my mom had no friends. She had nobody. She couldn't even work. He made her work at home. So nowadays we love that. But
yeah, that was not a thing at that time.
She used to work in a salon surrounded by a bunch of friends. And no, that wasn't
probably threatening to him that she might air the dirty laundry to somebody and they'd find out.
Exactly. And so he cut off her support system by telling her, let's build a salon in the house. So then all of her clients would come to the house and he could monitor what my mom was doing and what she was saying and like, what was she saying to her clients and are they going to go tell anyone? So it always looked like this beautiful, happy family. My mom also had an au pair and she was from Sweden and she came and took care of us. And then my mom was able to do the hair and everything. But we would be able to go over my grandmother's house, my maternal grandmother's house, for holidays because I had a big Italian family. There were big events like Thanksgiving and Christmas that we just couldn't miss because it would look weird. You just,
Right.
and of course, I'm sure my stepdad didn't mind having a feast or getting presents. So he was fine with that.
Right.
So I started to whisper to my grandmother. Now you have to also understand my grandma, she's from Queens, New York. She grew up in a very, very strict family. She's an older woman at this point. I'm not sure exactly what age range she's in at this point in her life, but she's been a lot more sheltered. And there are things in her past where they were acceptable for a man to yell or maybe even to hit his wife across the face. I'm not sure. So I wasn't really, I didn't know any of that, but I wasn't sure how my grandmother was going to respond or whether she would believe me. But I was always very attached to my grandmother. And so I remember it was like a couple of Thanksgivings in a row. So I had to wait till Thanksgiving 2 years in a row to be able to really get a moment alone with my grandmother because my stepdad was always watching and he would look over at me and see what I was doing and see who I was talking to because he knew. He knew I was.
Vigilance over you is like a form of control.
Absolutely. And I knew he was watching me and I would always look over and see if this is the right moment. And I remember I whispered, and I can't tell you what it was. I don't remember, but it was something in a child's way of saying, I think I might have even said, I don't want to go home. I think I said, I don't want to go home. So she kind of looked at me and we had this, ever since that moment, we had this bond where all she had to do was look at me and we knew what each other were thinking, saying, and what I meant by something. And she kind of looked at me and she was like, she passed away in 2023. So, I can still hear her voice saying like, Claire, because that's my mom's name, Claire. And she would come running and say, I'm going to take Kimmy. I'm going to take Kimmy tonight. We have some things I want to do. My aunt wants to see her. And she would make up a lie. Is it wrong to lie? Not always, maybe.
Not in this situation, no.
And she would take me. And even if it were just overnight, my stepdad wasn't going to, in front of everyone, say, you can't have your granddaughter. You know why?
Right.
It would look weird. And it was all about appearances for him as well. So those were the moments where my grandma she didn't know what was going on exactly, but she knew that I didn't want to be there. In her mind, she could have thought, oh, it's the stepdad. Like, who wants a stepdad? Because she had a very traditional upbringing where her mother and father were together until the day they died. And she and her husband were as well. And so maybe she just thought like, oh, a broken family or something, like who would want to be a part of that? Because she was very judgmental in a good way sometimes. But she took me. And in those moments, I would tell her in my own way, he's bad. He's a bad man. And it took a long time for it to fully come out of me because I was deathly afraid that he would come and in the middle of the night, like strangle me or something. But I eventually was able to tell her what was going on. And of course, she confronted my mom, who then admitted that she too was involved in a toxic and violent relationship. But in those days, I don't know what resources she had or what abilities there could have been to help the situation. I just know that I finally got out of it completely when I was 10 years old. And that was when I knew I finally had to get out because it was getting bad. We were now cramped. We were in the boat. This is when we were living on the boat. We were in the smallest living quarters, a lot more intensity with violence when you're in like a small space. People get on each other's nerves easier. We had the dog barking and it was just a mess. And then I got for Christmas the Talk Boy. It was from Home Alone, I think. I think it was from Home Alone, but it was like a silver little tape recorder and you could record. And this was the first, I feel like it was like the first real electronic device I had where I was like, whoa, this is like amazing. We can record something and then you can hear it. So we would put the cassette tape in and I would take it everywhere. I would interview friends at school. I would say like, oh, what did you do today? And kind of like what we're doing now. I'd say, who are you? What's your name? But I started to realize I could record my stepdad because I wanted to tell without telling. I wanted to be able to have proof. And proof has been something, I ended up going to law school. So proof is something that I have to have in situations. Like if you can't prove that something happened to me, I have a really hard time believing it. Like I want to see the receipts. And so I think it happened from that young age where I was like, no one's going to believe me. They're just going to think I'm lying to not want to live on a boat or lying because I don't like my stepdad. So I started recording all the times that he was abusing me, my mom, whether it was verbal, whether he was hitting us. And I started accumulating quite a bit of evidence. And finally, I started to memorize the route when I started going to school. I mean, I was going to school. What I mean is like when my mom was driving me to school every morning, I would start memorizing the route and I was looking for payphones. So I would look. And finally I was like, oh, there's one pretty close. If I get off the boat, walk down, I think we were living on Isle of Venice in Las Olas, and then you come up to a 7-Eleven gas station, there's a payphone there. But then I had to remember my grandmother's phone number. So it's 566-5376.
Oh my God, you still know it.
And I made up a song so that I could remember it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would just repeat that when I was in school. I was like repeating it because I knew I can't write it down. I can't bring a piece of paper. I can't, this was going to be in the middle of the night when I left. I knew I was going to leave the boat in the middle of the night and I wouldn't be able to bring anything with me. So I was like, I have to memorize that. And then I had to save enough quarters because I wasn't really sure as a child, like how much it was to use a payphone. But I remembered going by it and seeing like a 25 and knowing it's 25 cents. And so I was like, well, I got to save at least like 10. And really I only needed one.
Yeah.
But I think it would be a 15-minute phone call with like one quarter.
How old were you at that time?
I think I was 10. I was 10.
God, my daughter is almost 10. When I think about that, a little child having to make that plan,
Yeah.
it's so heartbreaking. But
It is. I think that same way when I'm watching Shiloh grow up and thinking, at this age, I was doing this. At this age, I was going through that. And I just remember, like I said from the beginning, we all have a survival instinct. And I was way more mature, not necessarily like emotionally and mature of other things, but I was mature in my situation.
you had to, right? I mean, the situations you needed to be way more grown up than you should have been at that age.
Yeah, because it's always relative to what somebody's going through. Like I might not have known how to play the piano or, an instrument or known another language. Like some kids are more mature in that sense. It's whatever you're exposed to. And I definitely had a keen sense of, planning and thinking on my feet and knowing how to get out of a situation, a bad situation, knowing how to be even kind of counter manipulating my stepfather because I knew what would make him happy or make him sad or make him angry. So I learned very, very young to know what body language looks like and like the cues. Is that person getting upset right now? Like just from those subtle little things, I could know what I should do. So I decided to save my money. I did. I remember I had a jumper. It was what do you call those things that click? It's like
an overall thing with the
overalls. I had overalls, and in the little pocket up front, I put a whole bunch of the quarters. And then I brought my talk boy. I had to have the recorder with me. So I was like, oh gosh, I got to plan ahead because then I got to have the recorder. And the thing about living on this boat is it locks from the inside. So I mean, so do our homes. But what I mean is there's an actual like master lock, the little thing that clicks like you would put on a storage unit. And so how it closes is there's slats of wood that slide down and they lock at the bottom and they start sliding down one on top of the other. And then a glass portion of the boat slides up and then it meets one of the last wooden planks and a big lock is put on it. So you're not leaving. You're not leaving. And my mom couldn't leave and I couldn't leave. So the good thing about my V-berth is there was a porthole above where I would sleep. And it's also locked from the outside. So, when you're battening down the hatches, as they say, you're closing that from the top, you're locking it down. No water can get in, if you were capsized or whatever, the waves are coming over. But I knew that morning when I went to school, when I came home and we were going to eat dinner, I was like, I have to unlock that. I knew. I was like, I have to unlock that. And, I was hoping it would not make a loud noise when I was going to leave. But I opened that up in the evening and I just unlocked it but left it closed so that it would kind of look inconspicuous. Like no one would know it wasn't locked. And of course, I was distracting my stepdad that day. I remember I was distracting him so much. I was like, oh, let's play with the dog and like, let's do this. And so that he would just walk by that area without really giving it a second thought. Because this was my last chance. Like I was like, I don't know what was happening to me those days, but I felt something was imminent. I don't know what it was. It was just a feeling I had that if I didn't leave, something bad was going to happen. And it might have been from what he would say. Like he would say, like, I'm going to kill you, or, you know, you're never going to see the light of day again, or, you know, I'll give you a beating so bad you'll never be able to speak. Like just things. So that night I did. I just left. And I remember looking down at my sister and she was just sleeping. And I was like, oh my God, like I don't want to leave her, but there's just no way I can bring her with me. She's a little girl. And I just remember like quietly closing this top of it. And I don't know what this feeling is, but I'm sure that other people have felt it before when it was like I got to the top of the boat. I hadn't even escaped yet, but just getting on the other side of it, there was like this weird feeling that I felt later in life when I succeeded in something and would bring me back to that moment where I was just like, oh my God, like it's almost like you won the lottery. And I was just like, I did it. I did it. And I just ran.
Oh my gosh. How are you after hearing Kimbyrleigh's story?
It's so tough to listen to that. Picturing my daughter, your daughter, who are the age that she was when she had to do all these things.
In the overalls, putting coins in her.
I know, in her little overalls, like making a plan to leave the thing in the boat open to like run. Oh my God.
I know.
Um,
The ice. I don't think I'll ever look at a bathtub and ice again for sure. That was so
and that
painful.
was just one story.
I know.
I mean, we can probably fill 10 hours with all the stories she has, but that was just one situation, one incident she picked out, and I don't even want to know how many more there were. Sometimes I don't even know how people can still be so wonderful humans after going through something like that.
Right.
I mean,
Like,
we
how
don't
do you
know her like very well. We're not like her best friend, but we know her a little bit, and we had a few interactions with her, and she's such a nice,
lovely person.
kind, lovely person. Like, how can you even be that after?
Right. Like, how do you not
like
look
that?
at a man and wonder if he has a dark side?
Maybe she does that though. But how can you not just hate everything and everybody?
Right.
You know, even the woman. I mean, I think I said it, that the situation where she was in the bathtub, seeing her mom witnessing that and not doing anything, feels almost the worst of the whole situation to me. You know, looking to your mom and it's like, why are you not, you're supposed to help me. Yeah, like you're the one who's supposed to protect me.
I mean, neither one of us was there. We can't say.
No,
but
I'm not judging. I'm not saying the mom should have or do anything.
I know.
I'm just saying like, that must be so painful for a child.
Right.
To see that.
I totally
and it's like,
agree.
Okay, she's just standing there and she's not doing anything. I'm not saying, oh my God, the mom should have, or like, how could she?
Yeah.
Like, I've never been in that situation. So I cannot say anything about that.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say, obviously, neither one of us has been in that situation as the little girl, but I can relate to that feeling of like, if I intervene, is it going to make it worse? There's a part of me that empathizes with her mother because I have my own situation that I was in, And I had similar things where I was scared that if I did something, it was going to be even worse and escalate him even more. So I do kind of empathize with the mom a little bit. I get that.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if I
make him more mad, he's maybe gonna kill her or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we don't know what. I don't know what goes through. I've not been in a situation
Right.
that extreme. So, but I get what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's horrible.
But that's why it's so important to hear about these things and talk about them.
It felt good to give her the platform, to give her the time to like really go through all of this. And
I'm just in awe of her courage to share all of this and to go into the detail, and then also her courage as a 10-year-old running away and saying, like, this doesn't feel right. This is not okay. I don't want this anymore. I'm just in awe of her. I mean, our viewers don't have the pleasure of seeing her, but she's so petite. And for such a petite woman, she is equally like a dynamo of strength. I'm in awe of her.
Me too.
And we have part 2 next week.
Yeah, let's see where it goes. I mean, she escaped.
Mm-hmm. But then how did she go from 10-year-old runaway to where she is now? That'll be part 2.
Okay. So we see you next week.